All right, Ben, we are starting off with an overvalued, undervalued. Right? I'm going to hit you with 9 quick responses. Number 1, nature as luxury.
Undervalued and inevitable.
I like that.
True scarcity.
Airbnb rentals.
It's great if you're actually good at it. It's terrible if you're not. It's kind of like being a filmmaker. Most of them are going to fail, but if you're good, you're going to do extraordinarily well. If you can really curate and create a unique experience and fully integrate yourself as a labor source and build a brand off of it, like the Joshua Treehouse out where I'm at,
Right.
unlimited upside. But I think it's low opportunity for real estate developers, high opportunity for graphic designers, interior designers that want to go more vertical.
Is Airbnb the new restaurant owner?
Kind of, yeah. Over invested and underskilled.
I like that. Using influencers to help launch a hospitality project.
Well, I mean, as a content creator, I think that the appealing part is that you have scarce inventory and you're not on this treadmill to sell more $5 t-shirts. What I like about it is with a 65-room hotel, I only have 20,000 pieces of inventory to sell every year. And the more we sell, the higher the price goes up on those. So that feels like it's a great connection as a type of merch. And when you think about what people are doing when they're actually trying to support a content creator through one of their offerings, is they kind of want the experience more than a physical product. I don't think content creators are particularly good at managing CPG brands. Even you'll see Mr. Beast probably struggle with that with the most amount of scale. But creating meetups and experiences, interesting. That's what people actually want. And if you can do that in a physical place or a venue that you own, very appealing.
I like that answer. Building container homes.
There's no silver bullets in construction. There's just different ways to do it. It's how sort of committed you are to it, because whatever looks good on the surface, whether it be 3D printing, straw bale, rammed earth ships, container homes, they all have drawbacks. You just have to commit to what you're going to actually use as your means of production and then go all in.
Do you think it's overvalued or undervalued?
I think it's overhyped,
Okay.
and people don't realize how hard it's going to be.
I like that. Long-term ROI of boutique hotels.
Don't know. Haven't been in it long enough, and I am allergic to these kind of these predictions before you've lived them.
All right, so to be determined.
Yeah.
Instagram as market research.
It's good for A/B testing visuals to visuals, right? If you have the content assets to throw up two things and see what people respond to better, great. Hard to predict in terms of, because the attention spans are so short, of where you're actually building a real relationship with your customer. So great for testing visuals, not necessarily indicative of your relationship with your audience.
Hiring based on passion versus expertise.
I would say more on responsibility above everything. I think intelligence and information is pretty readily abundant in any sort of project, whether it be on the content side or on the real estate side. What you're looking for with your team is people that take responsibilities for their specific set of tasks and execute them. And I don't really care what their experience is. I care that they are able to communicate what they're going to do and do it. So I think we have artificial intelligence, or the beginnings of it. We're a long way from artificial responsibility.
Okay. All right. Launching a business with family.
If your family's awesome, it's great. If your family sucks, stay the hell away.
You have a good answer for that one. Building in high interest rate environments.
I don't really think, for me, and I'm not coming from a professional real estate background, I'm more from the design and the creative side. I think there's always opportunity. I think that's what we've seen consistently. So there's less competition, but in a high interest rate environment, and people are still looking for deals. You just have to be, put it this way, I kind of avoid too many of the broad trends because I'm not doing projects at a massive scale. I'm not developing millions of square feet around the country across all these markets. If I'm locked in on a project, it's very specific in its geographic location, in the construction type. So I think if you're pretty involved and hands-on with everything that you're touching across the development, there's always sort of a way to make it work regardless of the sort of macroeconomic situation. And I think in general, I think when I talk to kind of medium to small real estate developers, they get so caught up playing amateur economists and listening to things like the All In podcast, and they think they're doing themselves a favor by listening to tiers of information that are 3 steps above them and being like, that's how I'm going to climb this ladder, instead of like talking to their HVAC contractors and being like, do you have a lot of work right now? Do you think if we pace it this way, we could get a deal? Talking to their lumber yards and saying, okay, what is the cost ratio of light gauge steel studs to 2x4s at this particular moment? I think there's more opportunity looking below you and being more hands-on and knowing how your dollars are going into 2x4s and bricks than there is looking at the same sort of inputs that you don't control at the top end.
Do you bring investors into your deals?
Yeah.
Do your investors want to know kind of forward-looking economics, or
Yeah.
do you more just tell them, look, I design these things in a way that is unique and I have what I can control locked down, and don't pay attention to that? Or how do you go about that?
It depends on the size of the project, right? So when I do...
So 65 units is your new one. What's the total cost on that?
Just a little over 25. It's a little hard to separate because we only built on 10 acres, but we bought 180. So the land basis kind of distorts the construction cost, and we're going to be phasing out stuff. For a project of this size, which is the biggest one that I've been involved with as a developer, I brought in sort of an initial financial partner, and then we partnered with a family office that builds and holds, so HP Investors out of Southern California. So they are the ones that will look at those things. And so as a team, we try to, have a holistic view from me actually building physically furniture and carving things out of rocks and thinking about the social media and marketing side. But these guys, this is what they do all day long. And so when we kind of assembled the team, we were looking at the Venn diagram of, we don't have a lot of overlap in our background and our skill set, but we cover a lot of area across creative, construction, and on the finance side.
Had you worked with the family office prior to this?
No.
What's been the experience? Do you feel like you work well with them, or they just the number guys in the background and are asking for things that are unreasonable?
These things have to be collaborative, right? And I think we've seen, this is the first new hotel in the Joshua Tree area in 15 years, ground up construction. Meanwhile, we've seen visitorships to national parks around the country explode. So it's obvious that there's a lot of consumer interest in hospitality around these sort of great pieces of nature, but they've kind of defied, particularly in California, ground up construction. So when you go into this, you got to go into this where you realize that demand is evident, but process is probably hard. Otherwise, people would have done this already. So I think when you approach it with that kind of humility, you realize that your first assessments are probably going to be off unless you're that much smarter than everybody else and just figure it out right from the base. And I don't think that that's ever like a healthy way to sort of assume things. So we didn't just do a design and then permit it and build it. We did probably 30 or 40 different designs ranging from 10 units to all the way up to 65, and then even planning some ones that were bigger than that. And we had to constantly redesign it as we discovered new things, right? So once we found, when we initially sort of sat down with the city, which is one of the first things I like to do in a development process, is you go talk to the city manager, the city planner, you understand what they're thinking about before you put pen to paper and start trying to push your grand vision through. And one of the things that we found was that the infrastructural costs, not so much in like water and power, which is what people think about, but in building a sewage treatment plant was going to be this giant cost albatross that it was needed to sort of develop this ground up. So we had a bunch of loose ideas and pro formas. As soon as we found out that we're going to be sinking about $500,000 to $600,000 into a packaged sewage treatment plant because we were developing square footage beyond what septic is allowed for, then we had to completely redesign. We had to add more units, reconfigure. We had to take into consideration how the ground slopes and how our grading costs, which is one of your biggest cost factors, is just grading all that land and getting it to drain properly. So early on, you're constantly getting one additional piece of information from the technical, engineering, or permitting side that totally blows up your pro forma, and then you have to redesign it. So I think the nice part about having the people that are kind of creative and flexible on the financial side, working hand in hand with me and my team on the creative side, is that none of us get to, and we're all in it as owners, is that the design team doesn't realize the design's done until a pro forma works, which is often different than when you hire an architecture firm where you're outsourcing the creative who has no skin in the game. So we had to go through so many floor plans, so many site layouts, keep finding more information of what was required from an infrastructural standpoint, and then, need a whole new site plan. Oh, we discovered this sort of constraint on fire access roads. Changes everything. They're not going to let us do decomposed granite or gravel for the fire access roads. Has to be asphalt. Okay, that changes the whole cost structure. We got to tighten things up and bring the units closer together. So the design shouldn't be separate from the financial architecture. They both impact each other. And I think that's kind of how we were able to get this through where other people weren't, because we were willing to constantly start over.
That's a good point. Why do you, Mikey, it's not just smaller or new investors that don't go talk to the city first. Like, we see this even in our city with massive REITs. They just won't say anything. Get the property under contract, close on it, then go talk to the city. It's so important not to do that. Why do you think that is a challenge for a lot of groups, big or small?
I just think they don't know that there's an alternate way to do the process. I mean, when we tell people we have a property tied up under contract for 3 years, they're like, what? How do you have a property tied up for that long? Well, it's because we don't yet know what we can do with it. And until we know what we can do with it, we're not willing to buy it. I mean, I'm not going to spend $6 million on a, let's call it a 5-acre lot without knowing what I can actually do on the property. What if I can't do anything on it? What if ultimately the city says, nope, we have no desire to do this type of project. We have a general plan to do something else completely. If I'm in on that money without knowing what I'm doing, I'm taking a major, major risk.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is, I think it's important to gauge not just the direction of the city, but the willingness of not just the city manager, the city council, on if they want that project or not. But you're taking on risk there. If you got to get something entitled, you need a vote to get that to pass.
Well, I mean, case in point, we had a site in Pomona that we were looking at that we wanted to develop. I think it was 1,200 storage units on. And when we went to the city, we put it under contract, went to the city, and the city immediately told us, guys, we're not even focusing on storage at this point in time. All we care about is multifamily and housing projects. If you have that, it accommodates the general plan. We're willing to move forward on it. This project, you're years away from us even looking at it. So we walked away.
Yeah.
I think it has a lot to do with also the mindset of entrepreneurs and developers. They tend to see themselves as lone wolves that are going to concoct this thing, and then they're going to utilize extraordinary discipline and force of will to push this thing through.
Yeah.
And so they're like, okay, in the lab, coming up with the thing that this genius plan, and then I'm going to just do everything I can to make it sort of happen. And that works when that works well when you control most of the variables. But the minute you kind of realize that you're where you're at, and particularly in a place like California, you would be silly not to assume that there's not going to be some unforeseen challenges coming up from municipal, state, and the various sort of agencies that you have to sort of go through. Often people develop an adversarial relationship a little bit too early because they spent so much time investing in their idea and falling in love with it, and the minute they hit any restriction, they take it as a personal attack or someone trying to stomp on their dreams, when really these are people that have interesting lives of sort of public service. They're people that deal with a lot of constraints that we don't see as developers or professionals in real estate. They're not particularly well compensated. And in a lot of cases, they've had this job for quite a long time and have seen a lot of things sort of come and go, and are just inherently conservative about where they want to take risk for their community. when you give them a little bit of grace in just your initial assumption and just be, how do we make this person feel safe as they go out on a limb to help us figure out how to get our project done? I think that empathy goes a long way, and it's truly felt. And it's, when you talk to these people, it's extraordinarily sad to hear about how rudely they're treated on a continual basis. So they almost, a developer coming in, particularly if you're coming in from an area where you don't live and operate in the community. So it sounds like kind of touchy-feely in these things to, go have coffee, sit down, understand, go to a few meetings, see what the other project's presenting, how the community is reacting on, how the city council, when they're rolling their eyes. So much of our financial performance is tied up in this process. It's shocking how many people don't really engage with it, or they think I'm the developer, that's where I send my staff to do it. No, this is really important. We don't have precise control over it, so we should probably be hands-on. In terms of navigating these things, one of the things that's been really helpful in my sort of experience is with this project, one of the first hires was our civil engineering firm. We knew we were developing a lot of raw land into a pretty big development, particularly for this area. So we sat down with our civil engineer who has 30 years of experience or more working in this area. So she knows all the projects. She's seen projects that have failed, where people have hired her and the project never gets through CUP. And picking those people's brains instead of just immediately delegating and telling them what you want to create, but letting them sort of download to you all the things from failed projects that have kept them from going forward is pretty valuable. And they'll also explain the process of who to talk to at the city and what they tend to permit versus frown upon.
It's actually a really good recommendation that he just threw out there. If you're looking to try to do a project, go find, I think you can do this on LoopNet pretty easily, or CoStar for sure. Go find the projects that are currently in the permitting stage, in the construction stage, and find out through reviewing the minutes, watching the videos of the city council meetings, like what opposition did they face? What challenges did they go through? What questions were they asked? What adjustments did they have to make? And that will give you a good idea of what the appetite is from the city and what potential issues you may face from the community as you try to engage in a project. That will take time, but it could save you a ton of money.
Yeah, it is a really good point. You're right. Like even for our city, we get a lot of deals, and it's not the principal that shows up to the meeting. We have a lot of deals where there's no one there. It's really interesting the risk that they take by not doing the groundwork early. I'm surprised that the bigger groups are willing to do that. I think that's the shock for me. I understand the little guy. He's like, I'm going to do a 10 unit. I'm brand new. I've never done this before. They just don't know the game yet. But dude, when you're talking like $100 million plus projects and they're not putting in the groundwork, that's where I'm more baffled by it.
How much of this issue do you think, though, exists outside of California?
Way less. Yeah, California and New York, probably the most dynamic markets to build in, the most challenging by far. California, I think, might be the one, though.
I mean, it certainly takes longer. I always think it's weird when people say that it's harder, right?
Whoa, hang on one sec. Before we get back into the podcast, I have a quick update. We just got 3 new apartment buildings that we're putting into our 6th fund, and it's in such an undersupplied market. So if you've always wanted to get into real estate because you want passive income, tax benefits, and appreciation, but you didn't want to do the work, I might have an offering for you. Check out communecapital.com/fund6. I'll also include the link in the description. Let's get back to the interview.
Because, I mean, I kind of watched what's happened in like Austin over the last few years, and you were able to do things fast, but so was everyone else. I think it's understanding the competitive landscape regardless of where you're at is kind of the key. If you're in a place that's relatively fast on the entitlement side, it just means there's less barriers of entry to anybody with access to capital to come in and do something right next to you.
Yeah, so you're looking at it as it's harder to be successful, but I find that a lot of people miss the back end
Right.
metric. They look at it as it's harder to do the project. It's harder to get it built. It costs more. They look at the barrier as the only metric of difficulty.
Right.
But that's exactly how we look at it. If it's this hard to build, that means the competition is less, giving you the easier potential of making money.
Right.
Right. But as far as getting a project through, but it's not even, it's apples and oranges. It's so much harder here.
Yeah. I think it depends on your attention span too, right? Because if you think about the actual skill sets that go into getting something permitted, it's really just reading PDFs and understanding them, and then reapplying what you learn from those PDFs into geometry on paper that's your plans and those kind of things. So I think what is often the gap that creates this point of frustration is the risk takers that want to sort of, have acquired some capital, want to deploy that, want to move fast and think at a high level, are often not the PDF readers. And so they outsource or delegate down the PDF reading to their professional staff, which is paid on sort of monthly retainers and doesn't have skin in the game. So I think that's where I see a lot of the frustration when I talk to my developer friends, which is why they tend to sort of stick within a specific vertical, because they kind of, for the first few projects, kind of discover it.
Yeah, 100%. I'm sure it's got to be entitlement risk as well, right? Like if you're in a city, I know things have changed in California, but prior to the housing laws, you were rolling the dice if you were going to get a project entitled. Right. So the money you had at risk on the front end, I think you could make the argument, was much greater with a higher probability of no entitlement, meaning you just got hosed. Or in some of those other cities, and I think it was a different risk calculation.
Yeah,
right?
and
but I get what you're saying.
But specifically that soft cost money, right? When we're paying for biological studies and all of those things, that money is not going into sticks and bricks that that inherently accrues or creates value.
Right.
If you spend all those money on all those PDFs and the project doesn't go, that's gone.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, but it dovetails into even the working permit process of the project, right? Like you submit your plans, you get feedback. If you're not, to your point, reading those PDFs well, taking the input that you get from the city, and then when you resubmit, because remember, you submit, it takes here locally in California, sometimes 60, 90 days until you get back a response with feedback. If you're not taking the feedback as it is and really understanding what you're being asked, when you go to resubmit and you're just resubmitting, let's say within a week, you're going back on another 90-day cycle just to get another round of feedback. And sometimes that second round, they're reiterating the stuff that they talked to you in the first round that you didn't actually adopt. So his point is actually quite interesting in the sense that, because we're very much in the weeds on the permitting stage, it's like, are you really understanding what you're being asked to do, and are you implementing it before you resubmit your second round? Because you could be 4 rounds in and you burnt a year just like that.
Yeah, we bought a project that the guy was 7 years in on his entitlements.
Yeah.
The Garden Street.
Yeah.
That was a brutal one. So you take a design to build approach, right? Is that what you
More or
mentioned?
less. I'm not a general contractor, although I have built my own projects, but my background's in design.
Okay.
I have some occasional sort of entrepreneurial tendencies. I'll tend to do an unusual real estate project about every 5 years.
Okay. Who builds them?
It depends. And
You guys hire it out, or are they part of the partnership?
So for my first big development was a multifamily in Boston. And I basically I talked to one of my friends that was a consultant. I was like, who's the best at sort of predicting the improvement of land values? She's like, oh, Whole Foods, hands down. And I was like, well, what are they looking at? She was like, well, they're looking at not at sort of the rise, because everyone looks at that, and the rise of sort of prices. They're looking at when payday loan advance places start diminishing in an area as a sign of early upward mobility. So I put a bunch of alerts for wherever a Whole Food was rumored to come in. Someone was coming into Jamaica Plain, and then bought land right there. And I got a great deal on the land because it was only zoned for 2 units. And then since my background's in design and architecture, I was like, well, I'm going to spend about a year trying to get this rezoned to 3 units. And that's how I'm going to create my economic advantage by reducing my basis. So what we ended up having to do in lots of conversations with the city is we actually deeded an electric car into the condo association to reduce the parking requirements, which allowed us to build 3 units onto things. And that was kind of the first example where I thought of the permitting process, if you're coming from a creative background, is actually a potential to improve the performance, not just survive that process. And the other kind of interesting thing that we saw is when we got the initial cost estimates from the general contractor that I ended up hiring, they're like, look, this secondary fire stair is going to be about $200,000, right? 2 means of egress. So we ended up changing from 2-bedroom apartments to lofts. And all my real estate friends were saying, no. Everyone wants 2-bedroom apartments for this square footage, 1 per floor, right? 3-unit building. And I'm like, well, how do you know that? And they're like, well, this is what sells the most. I'm like, oh, so you're concluding demand based on supply. So then I did my own sort of research on what were loft spaces renting for. Because with lofts, we wouldn't have to do secondary means of egress because the building's only 50 feet long. And so we save a couple $100,000 on that fire stair, plus we get more square footage going back into the units and not that. And what we saw is that there was not enough data because there wasn't that many lofts in Boston, but they typically rented for more even though they cost less to build. And so, right, okay, we're doing a 3-story buildings with lofts on each floor, saved a few $100,000 on the not having to build that secondary means of egress, and then also saved a lot of money on the interior build out because it's a lot less door framing and stuff like that. So I'll typically use the permitting process as kind of where I'm talking closely with my general contractor, trying to get a sense of what's driving cost here or there, and then looking for these gaps where we can kind of remove a big infrastructural ask, whether it be a parking spot or something like that, and trying to get creative less with how the building looks, but more where the sort of infrastructural money's going, and then reconfiguring things constantly until you find that kind of sweet spot.
It's a very rare conversation to be hearing from somebody who's in the design architect
I know, that's what I was going to say. You sound so unique compared to other designers that I'm friends with. He has a much better grasp on
economics.
Yeah. And the reality to actually build it.
And I wonder if you think that that's because you are an equity partner in the project versus just being hired for the design.
I mean, skin in the game is an incredible motivator.
Yeah.
Particularly when it's, you and friends and family, as was the case with this sort of Boston building. It was like, I think when I paid my final invoice to my general contractor, I had like $700 left. And we were contemplating doing painted plywood floors just to get through CO and get the bare minimum done. I ended up building out all the cabinets and making concrete countertops because couldn't afford the mill worker. But no, I think it's rare that you would outsource creativity that isn't a wrapper, that actually is core to the economic cost structure of the endeavor to someone that doesn't have skin in the game.
Yeah, I hear you. I totally do. It's like in San Diego. San Diego has a big, I'm sure you know this, a big scene that's designed to build.
Right.
We actually have a partner out there that they design it. They're in charge of building it as well. They have more of an outlook like you. It's like they're not going to present something that looks phenomenal on paper that you could never realize. Like it's grounded in reality. But that seems to be unique to San Diego. Like when we look at a lot of our other projects, throughout the state, if I could have the design team be part of the partnership, I don't know how you feel about that. I would do it. But what I found is it's hard for people to let go of an upfront fee or take a discounted fee on the front end so that they can have what they view as equity but risk of getting paid on the back end. It seems like most people aren't willing to do it.
I think
but I love it. I want everyone to have skin in the game.
I don't think it would work as well partnering with like an established architecture firm. I think what you want is to think about all the architects that you've worked with and think about the junior associate that was really sharp and bright.
That's a good point.
That's making like $68,000 to $75,000 a year, and giving them an opportunity where they're more in-house, and so they can quickly. They're not going to be your architect of record, but they're going to be someone that knows CAD and that can draw as fast as you can reconfigure the pro forma. And I think even just having that in-house drafts person sitting next to the kind of people is actually what you want. And you also make them do other things. You make them get cost estimates. You make them a generalist for that. Then when it comes to actually needing the architect of record, you go out and hire a firm, but you have someone in-house that's almost acting as a designer's owner's rep for your sort of development office.
That's a good point. I like that idea.
That's a good idea.
That is a good idea.
And they can do that work while they're
They can
still
do
working
construction
in that firm.
administration for you, a lot of those kind of things as well. But adding that one other skill set of being able to take floor plans, redline them, redraw them. Also, it's going to save you a ton of billable hours when you're working with an architecture firm. When you say, hey, we just want to move this wall over here.
Yeah, that's a good point. How much importance do you put on design, and how do you balance that with cost?
Or function.
So you talk about design as like the visual output of what everything looks like? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, like so basically what, like our world, it's so easy to make it all about what the numbers look like on your pro forma. And the result of that is every single apartment looks the same today. It's so boring.
Right.
And then, how do you make something look cool and unique where it's going to cost more to do in theory? And can you even push rents above what they're currently getting to justify it? Like, how are you navigating through that?
Right. So,
or maybe it's different in hospitality because it's more experience-based and maybe there's a different ceiling on what you can charge. I don't know.
When it comes to sort of conversations around design, I think people are often talking about style. And they think that style of the moment is good design. And when it comes to hospitality, we can quickly see that that's not true. When I was in my 20s, the W Hotel was about the coolest hotel going.
Yeah, I remember it, yeah.
Are they not around anymore?
No, they're around. They're just not cool.
But not cool, right? So what happened? Was it bad design, or was the design imperative to do something of that particular moment which didn't last very long? Meanwhile, you might think of something like the Ace Hotel, which I actually think was more successful as a design, regardless of how cool we think it was at its peak. The Ace Hotel was interesting to me because they didn't use expensive materials, but they created a sense of sort of coolness through using things like humasote and exposed edge plywood and using almost like Home Depot level materials, but in kind of a more hipster way. So when I think about design as a developer, I remove my own personal taste and I simply think about what would be differentiated, because that's pretty important, particularly when it comes to hospitality, less so in sort of residential where people are, just so economically constrained and just want to get something safe. So I think about, probably safe to assume that you're not an eternal genius when it comes to curating aesthetics, no matter who you are. And I think the track record of hotels sort of bears that out. The Proper Hotel is really cool right now. I'm not sure it's going to be cool 5 to 10 years from now. So I kind of remove that idea that my taste is universal and those things. Plus, we all have our sort of aesthetic biases. So I tend to think is the process unique enough without being overcomplicated where it's going to have a bunch of unintended costs, where we'll end up with a unique outcome that makes sense, right? So one of the things that I think is interesting about doing modular, it's not that modular is good or bad. It's not that 3D printing buildings is good or bad, but they will result in a aesthetic outcome that is inherently differentiated because of the way it's made. And I think we see that a lot in like food, right? Like we're not in the age where like a Cheesecake Factory, even with all their options, is that desirable. What we're interested is when we hear a story from a friend, oh, this place, Blue Hill Farms, right outside of New York, they actually have a whole farm. And every radish you ate is the best tasting radish you've ever had because they do their own compost and they do that. So I think what I'm sort of interested in is that if you do a unique process and you try to emphasize the novelty of that process and not try to do the Disneyland thing where you just build the cheapest shells that you can and then just dress them up in a way that will inherently look fake, you'll end up with something that is naturally differentiated, is of that particular moment in that time. And I think that will tend to give you a piece of infrastructure that has a little bit more staying power than just being like, oh, Tulum's hot right now. Let's make everything look like Tulum.
Yeah. Does cost play a factor in that at all?
Of course.
Because modular, like you just made the case for modular because it's unique, but it's also an extreme discount as well, right? Or is it not? Is modular equal?
There's no silver bullets in construction, period, right? When I got started off in architecture and design, we were interested in structural insulated panels, these sort of panelized systems, and we were interested in ICF, and we've seen all these really interesting, novel technologies kind of come and go. They're all fine. They all work. 3D printing is interesting, but none of them, if they had a huge economic advantage, we would see them more often. Modular has some advantages, particularly in a remote location like Joshua Tree, where we're building. We're literally 3 miles from the national park entrance. We don't have a huge labor pool out there, particularly for like skilled millworking and things like that. Our main general contractor is coming in from Palm Springs, so they're bringing in people from there. So that's a bit of a commute that reduces the efficiency of the day-to-day basis. The advantage is, theoretically, with modular, is that you can have your site work and be pouring foundations at the same time you're building out the hotel rooms themselves. So this idea that you have 2 construction sites that are moving in parallel. That sounds great, right? Reduce your construction time, which reduces your sort of interest costs and all these things.
Sounds like double the overhead.
It's double the project management in a shorter amount of time. And the coordination between those different groups is really challenging. And you've also, most importantly, split responsibility. The whole value of hiring a really good general contractor is that they're going to take responsibility, particularly if you have like a fixed contract or a fixed price thing with them. The minute you bring in this other big player that they don't directly control, you create a lot of opportunities for finger pointing on scope gaps between these things. Also, theoretically, you've reduced some of the inspections from a local level to a state level, which has some sort of pros and cons. But it doesn't mean that the local jurisdiction is going to necessarily know this process and isn't going to overstep and try to take some of the state responsibilities because they haven't done a modular project before. So it is a way of doing things. In retrospect, if I was to do this project again, I would probably still go with modular for all the rooms because there's a lot of repetition across those things. And given what I've seen of the labor market out where we're at in a remote location, I would probably do modular for the rooms, but for the common spaces and the one-off spaces, I would have site built those. So once we went with the modular manufacturer, we said, oh yeah, our clubhouse and our back of house stuff, we'll just do those out of modules too. But we spent an equal amount of time on the 15 or so modules that make up the common space as we did across all the rooms.
Got it. That makes sense. That's interesting.
You bought 180 acres to build 65 units. So the 65, sorry?
A little overkill.
So the 65 units cover what radius?
About 10 acres.
Okay, so what's the plan for the 170 other acres? Why buy so much?
Couple things. I'm going to go back a little bit. I first bought land in Joshua Tree around 2017, and it was all based off this one graph I saw. It was the correlation from 2013 to 2016 of Instagram's monthly active users and visitorships to national parks. And these two things, for that 3-year period, were just moving up and to the right in perfect concert with each other. And it was the first time I thought, like, oh, the more we consume digitally, the more we're going to want and aspire to the opposite of that, right? So this idea that digital will replace the real world really is just going to make the real world more and more valuable, particularly for the unfakeable experiences like national parks, nature. And the other interesting trend that I saw was people talking more and more about actually wanting to see stars and going someplace really dark for full moons, right? Because obviously we know that like beach views are valuable. We know views of mountains are really valuable. We've known that from real estate for a long time. What I think we sort of forgot was just openness is actually pretty valuable. Quietness is pretty valuable. And being able to lie in a daybed on a private patio and just like stare at the Milky Way without all the light pollution is really valuable for someone that's used to spending $4,000 a month on a really cool condo in LA, but they literally cannot buy that experience within the city. And so The first interest in sort of land outside of national parks was 2017. That's when I first started buying land in Joshua Tree. And it was based on that idea of the more we consume digitally, the more we're going to want nature. And I think we're even seeing that now extend from nature as we know it to things like agriculture. I recently saw David Beckham posting with a great amount of pride about something he owns. And it wasn't a Bugatti, it wasn't any of that crap. It was about his chickens and his garden. And it's like, one, great sense of sort of cultural aspirational values to move towards these things that are a little bit more of the earth, that impact our health, that allow us to provide for our family. But I think those kind of trends are kind of undeniable. When I was a kid, you were bawling if you had a TV in your bathroom or your kitchen. More screens meant you were just doing better in life. Now, everyone interesting that I meet is trying to get their screen time from 5 hours to 4 hours or from 4 hours to 3.5. So I think fundamentally the idea of open land in a beautiful location, it answers its own questions. It's the actual space that's valuable. And if you look at the majority of people that visit Joshua Tree National Park are coming from LA or San Diego, right? They're coming from cities. And they have better restaurants there, they have more culture, more galleries, all these things. What they don't have is emptiness, darkness, clear views of the skies, uninterrupted views of mountains. And so land out in these places is comparatively way less expensive than cities, but you can migrate people from the cities out there. And that's kind of what we saw as the initial value proposition of all these Airbnbs, was giving people a break to their typical sort of urban life. So cities were consolidating the majority of upper middle class to higher income earners, but in that they were not having the ability to like walk up and just like have a cup of coffee and just stare off into space. So that's why so much land that's where the value was, that's where the experiential difference is, and then it also gives us the ability to keep adding more inventory to relative to our infrastructural cost of developing the raw land and bringing this infrastructure right to the edge of nature.
Never thought about it that way. The more people are on social, the more they want to be connected with nature.
Yeah, I think that's obvious with like the whole idea of like even run clubs are like a great example of this. So.
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
I've never thought of it this way. Let's take social out of it, but let's keep everything else that we dealt with, over processing, everybody feeling like they have no energy. We felt the business side of, I think, not just food, but almost everything we enjoy become
we're trapped by efficiency. We're imprisoned by...
Right. So I guess my question is, do you think this outcome was inevitable, that we were going to go more towards what we experienced in the beginning, which was clean eating, high energy, being out in the environment, regardless of social media coming onto play? Was social media just the gas on the fire?
No, I think it's just I think you could remove social media. I don't think it has much to do with the posting part. I think it has to do with the digital consumption part. Right? The more Pop-Tarts we consume, the more, I remember when I first got like my first real paycheck, right? And went grocery shopping and was like, I'm going to get some of the cereal that we couldn't afford as kids. And that was fun for like a week or two. And then it was like, this is disgusting. And you start getting back to that. I think that there's a efficiency and convenience are like dominant trends that are really hard to subvert. It takes a huge amount of force of will to fight against the inevitable flow towards these things. But when we are having our little more esoteric moments, we kind of feel we're at our most basic when we're just following what's obvious sort of efficient sort of consumption trends. It's easier to just, turn on Netflix and chill out for an hour at the end of the day than to go meet up with friends for drinks, right? But after a certain amount of time, we kind of see the limitations of that. And so I think it's more having to do with like the digitization of everything. I think the more people order off of Amazon, the more they get excited about going to the farmer's market. So I think the other end Whereas the grocery store sort of always stays sort of static because it's not really that experiential. But I think things like Erewhon and farmers markets do well the more our day-to-day shopping is done by just sort of clicking buttons in a disconnected way on Amazon.
Let me draw a different parallel that I think will hit for you on this one. You started shutting the phone down on Sundays, right? For family time. How do you feel when you turn it back on or when you're ready to re-engage? Do you sense that you have a higher energy level because you shut it down for 12, 24 hours? Or do you feel like the same that you did before?
I don't know if I feel a recharge in turning my phone off, only because like I'm getting more beneficial time with my family, but it's still 4 kids under 13. So
Not exactly
the exhaustion
relaxing.
is happening with or without the phone.
But there is a sense of eagerness or excitement to turn it back on and reconnect and see what's going on because you took a brief moment of respite.
Yeah, I agree with you that like having the phone on, especially with like probably the dopamine aspect of it, taking a break from that, you can make the argument. It's like, yeah, dude, you're just like frying yourself into exhaustion, and you have to have a recharge somewhere, right? I just thought it was a curious point. I just thought it was an interesting point.
I totally get the point that I go through it every week. Every week, the moment I look forward to the most is sundown on Friday, shutting it down, and then not knowing that I'm disconnected from the digital world for the 24 hours. That I'm disconnected until Saturday night comes around and I turn it back on and I get flooded with everything that hit. But at least I know every week going into Friday night, I've got that period of time where I'm not plugged into the international world. I'm not plugged into the phone. I have no idea what's going on. I get to focus on real relationships with real people and to just disassociate myself from technology. It's huge. And I think a lot of these people, especially like the people living in the urban neighborhoods that are on the social media, that are ambassadors or influencers or whatever the case may be, sure, they may take their phones with them to go to his resort, but they're spending a lot more time disconnected, I'm willing to bet, at his hotel than they are.
I think it makes total sense on the disconnecting for a weekend. Like plugging a hotel in an area like that, I totally agree. I think where I was thinking about it is this a more of a long-term trend that becomes more permanent, right? Like we saw a lot of people move out of California and it was like Idaho, more land, slower pace, Texas. Those type of people, not all, but a lot of them now are going, yeah, this is...
Not a trend, a shifting in what is considered aspirational, right? The same way that I think a really interesting parallel to think about it is fitness. There's never been more people with six packs than there are today. But yet collectively, broadly, people are really obese, right?
Right.
So what's aspirational in health and fitness is insanely high now. These people are like ridiculously, they're like bench pressing massive amounts. They're also running super fast miles. So at the high end, the differentiation has gotten extraordinary of what's considered fit now versus when we were in our teens. The amount of people that go to have gym memberships, way, way up. But the average is still low.
That's a good point.
Right. So I would say not everyone's going to go to farmer's market and go to Erewhon, right? But what's interesting is that there's these things that people are willing to pay ludicrous amounts of money for, $15 smoothies and those kind of things. And the way I like to think of this is, one of my favorite sort of sayings is that hipsters are really good at creating value, but bad at capturing it, right? So if you look at like areas like take Williamsburg, Brooklyn, for example, right? It was an inexpensive area, so cool people started coffee shops and created their restaurants and did little impromptu theater things and made these pubs sort of popular. And then the area becomes really desirable. It's culturally rich. There's places to pop in around. And then the expensive sort of condo developers sort of come on top of that. We see that over and over and over again. I think like if you look at people that got to like Ojai early and were kind of doing these little weird kind of hippie boutique things, and now that area is in really high demand. Silver Lake, the list goes on. And if you go farther back to like Soho and the meatpacking districts, cool young creatives come into a place that's underpriced. They make it cool, and they often don't, a few of them maybe bought in and captured some of that value, but it's normally other people then coming and burning that coolness into the ground and extracting the sort of value out of that. I see that happening now in sort of some of the more rural areas. And right now, the coolest place to live in California, if you're a young creative that's doing okay, but can't afford to buy in LA, which is most of them, is 29 Palms, California. We've seen so many of my sort of creative peers and friends move out there and literally buy failed Airbnbs and live out there full time. Our interior designers moved out there full time for this project. Shout out to Gray Space. My best sort of like steel and welding fabricator moved out there full time. They can get in the door and own real estate for $250,000, $300,000, that kind of price range for a single family house. But most importantly, if they were to leave LA where they're sort of renting and go to a place as close to LA as possible that was affordable, they'd have to tell their friends that they moved to Riverside. And Riverside's still way more expensive than 29 Palms. When they tell their friends that they moved to a place like Joshua Tree right next to the national park, one, they have the cultural street cred. It doesn't sound like they're making an economically desperate situation, but they're able to get their sort of foot in the door. And so I think what we're seeing right now is sort of the rural version of the kind of Brooklification of everything that we saw in the 2010s. And that's why places like Hudson Valley, New York, that's why places like all up and down the Central Coast have Michelin star restaurants now. Los Olivos, an amazing place near my hometown. San Luis Obispo is really cool. And I think that's the sort of interesting trend is and that's why my main kind of thesis is look to where the young, cool people are investing their time and feel some sort of sense of identity in investing in there and come in and try to work with them.
I mean, that's what we did in North Park. If you think about it, our property in San Diego.
Well, you go all the way back to Long Beach when we first did that.
100%.
Yeah.
But in North Park in San Diego, 10 years ago, that was a rough neighborhood.
Yeah.
And, now the coffee shops are all there. The restaurants are all there.
Yeah, you nailed it. Like, that's interesting. They do make all the areas cool. And then the area gets gentrified. They never participate in the upside of the growth.
Right.
What you're saying is pull them into the growth.
Right.
Yeah.
And let them be kind of hands-on curators, right? So if I look at like some of like the building types right now that are kind of distressed, like a lot of shopping malls and stuff like that, immediately you look at how you sort of acquire it, how you sort of do a bare minimum renovation, when really you might want to think of it more as like an agricultural model, is how do you place a couple of key tenants that are going to underpay you in terms of sort of rent, but overinvest to make their dream come true in the space that you own and physically improving it as you go. When we had our first architecture office, right out of grad school, we fixed that place. We got the cheapest building we could get, and we made that building so nice. We painted it ourselves on the weekend. We improved it. We made that piece of garbage look as cool as it possibly can. We took all of our samples from lighting companies and installed them, because we care about the way things look, and we were going to spend a lot of time there. We were the ideal tenants.
Yeah.
And there's so many talented creatives, particularly in Southern California. There's no greater concentration of people with extraordinary taste. And you think about the ones that maybe aren't kind of really cut out to sort of take and assess risk at the sort of capital level, but will work their asses off to improve whatever situation they're in. And I think that's the kind of marriage between creative and sort of entrepreneur developer that's often missing, that can be really beneficial for both sides.
I love that. Ben, anyone that wants to check out the new hotel, where are they finding it?
So check it out on Instagram, reset.hotel. Just search Reset Hotel Joshua Tree. We're open now, so y'all have to come out.
Yeah.
Good.
Love
We will.
to.
We'll bring the girls out there.
We'll look at some stars. We'll do a little grilling, and yeah.
And then if anybody wants to just find you.
Oh, if you just look Benjamin Uyeda on Instagram, you'll kind of see what I'm working on, including a lot of construction information around the hotel.
Love it. Thank you so much. Great seeing you. I can't wait to go check it out. We will for sure.
Yeah.